Today we will be looking at 3 horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one is a prime example of respecting caving protocols, where a companion's assumption led to a tragedy he would have never imagined. As for the last one, you will understand no matter where you are in a cave, danger is always lurking behind. Viewer discretion advised. On November 27, 2016, Amy Maria Arriaga and Alessandro Morano prepared for a day of adventure at Sistema Actun in Quintana Roo, Mexico. Friends through years of diving together, they were both deeply familiar with the thrill and danger of cave diving. Amy, in particular, was captivated by the beauty of the underwater world, often pausing to take photos of herself, exploring these alien landscapes. These snapshots, vibrant images of the aquatic caves and her silhouette suspended in blue, were regular features on her social media, where she shared her love of diving with friends and followers. Their chosen destination, the Sistema Actun, was a legendary cave system stretching for miles beneath the Yucatan Peninsula, known for its delicate beauty and complex routes. The two discussed their plan in detail, mapping out their intended dive to the Kuzan Loop, with Gran Cenote as both the starting and ending point. Morano had planned to capture video footage of Amy as they journeyed through the submerged caverns, hoping to capture her as she explored and swam through the caverns. When they reached the Gran Cenote, they checked their gear and descended into the shimmering waters. Arriaga led the way, with Morano close behind, setting his camera in place to capture each step of their journey. The two worked together seamlessly, marking key points in the cave to ensure they could find their way back and following the main line that would lead them through their intended path. As they swam deeper, the light from the outside world faded, leaving only the soft, eerie glow from their flashlights. The familiar thrill of being in the belly of the earth coursed through them, but with it, an awareness of the risks. They moved with practiced care, noting familiar markers and adding their own where needed, ensuring that they could navigate back to safety. When they approached no-name cenote, an open point in the cave where light filtered down through the water, Morano motioned for them to pause. The light cascading through the cenote was too beautiful to miss, and Morano wanted to capture it. Amy watched the scene with an almost reverent appreciation, then continued to explore nearby as Morano focused on his camera. For Amy, these moments were always special, the rare combination of light and darkness, the stillness in a place few had ever seen. When Morano finished, he looked up to find Amy gone. At first, he assumed she had wandered a bit further to explore or exited at one of the nearby cenotes. He swam around, briefly searching the immediate area, checking each nearby opening. Still, there was no sign of her. The unsettling thought crossed his mind that perhaps she had continued ahead, thinking he was following. Believing she had swum ahead on the planned route, Morano pressed on. He followed the markers they had placed, picking them up as he went, assuming she would be waiting for him at the next stop. This assumption of his led to a tragedy he would have never imagined. But by the time he reached Gran Cenote, his heart sank. Amy was nowhere to be seen, and worse of all, he had removed her markers, her only lifesaver. Concern growing with each passing minute, he retraced his steps, re-entering the cave and replacing the markers along the route. As he swam deeper, he encountered another dive team. When he described Amy to them, they recalled seeing a diver fitting her description near Cenote Ho Tool. According to the team, Amy had shown no signs of distress when they saw her, which reassured Morano, though he couldn't shake his sense of dread. That's when he realized his grave mistake of removing the markers. Reality hit him hard. In his attempt to safeguard their route, Morano had inadvertently removed Amy's only guide back. This mistake emphasized the importance of respecting dive markers, never assuming a buddy's location, and always maintaining strict adherence to cave diving protocols. Morano understood that she may have tried to retrace her path, inadvertently looping back into a deeper part of the cave. When the other dive team's line intersected her path, she could have become confused, following it instead of the route they had initially marked together. With no further information and his air running low, he was forced to surface once again to switch to a fresh tank. Once equipped with fresh air, Morano re-entered the cave, following the markers he had placed. His movements were hurried but cautious. As he approached the Kuzan Loop, his flashlight caught sight of a still figure. It was Amy. Floating lifeless, her body rested in the eerie silence of the cave. With profound sadness, Morano took in the scene, examining what remained of her gear to understand what had happened. Both her air tanks were completely empty, an evident sign that she had likely lost her way and spent precious moments circling through the cave, searching for the path back. Her dive line had been removed after he picked up their markers, a mistake that left her without the critical guidance she would have needed to find her way back out. Piecing together the tragic final moments, left without air, disoriented and alone, Amy had succumbed to the unforgiving demands of the cave. Morano gently pulled her body toward the nearest cenote opening, where a team of divers attempted resuscitation efforts. Sadly, it was too late. He swam her back to Grand Cenote, where authorities and her loved ones awaited with heavy hearts. It's crucial to always maintain strict adherence to cave diving protocols, where even the smallest miscalculation could prove fatal. In the end, Amy's love for the underwater world had led her to this final, tragic encounter with its mysteries. The next story will show you how one small misstep can cause an unimaginable chaos. On the afternoon of April 11, 1981, a gruesome event awaited in West Knox County, Tennessee, as three young friends, John McReynolds, 16, Bon Funnel, 19, and Greg Rogers, 15, prepared for an adventure they had long anticipated. Despite having little equipment and even less experience, they were ready to explore Ebenezer Cave, a well-known but closed to the public cave near Knoxville. Only John had ventured into caves before, yet he too was unfamiliar with this particular site. With two flashlights, they set out to explore the dark corridors that wound deep beneath the earth. As they ventured deeper into the cave, they climbed over rocks, slipped through narrow passageways, and, at one point, crossed a precarious traverse they'd have to tackle again on their way out. Though their spirits were high, their lack of proper equipment and training weighed heavily unseen. They had to climb down the muddy path cautiously, as at the bottom there was a deep pool of water. After making it to the bottom, they had to hop onto a solid surface at the side, from where they had to continue their journey. After nearly 30 minutes of exploration, the group decided to head back. They retraced their steps, moving carefully through the dark and jagged passages. Soon, they arrived at the same traverse they had crossed earlier, a slippery, narrow path stretching over a deep pit. The area was treacherous, slick with wet mud, and offering only a few weak handholds on the moss-covered rock wall. This time, they had to climb up, the force of gravity working against them, making it even more difficult than the descent. John took the lead, gripping his flashlight as he balanced himself. But just as he began to crawl up, after around 20 feet, his foot slipped. In an instant, he lost his balance, skidding and flailing in a desperate attempt to grab onto something. His flashlight fell wildly from his hand, spinning and sending disorienting beams across the walls as he tumbled, colliding with the jagged edges. His screams shook the cave, as his friends, horrified, could only watch. After a harrowing fall, John splashed into a pool of water some 20 feet below, sending up a shockwave of frigid spray. The cave was silent for a beat, as Funnel and Rogers processed the horror of what they'd just seen. They scrambled down to the edge of the pit, calling frantically to John. At first, he was visible in the murky water, desperately thrashing as he tried to stay afloat. His head bobbed just above the surface, eyes wide with terror. His injured arm made swimming nearly impossible. His friends stretched out their hands, thinking he might grab any one of them, but every attempt to move seemed only to draw him deeper into the water. Each frantic stroke John attempted seemed only to exhaust him further. Within seconds, he began to sink, disappearing beneath the dark water as ripples spread across the surface. Panic set in for Funnel and Rogers. Knowing they couldn't reach him alone, they began shouting for help. Their voices echoed through the cave, carrying their cries to other explorers nearby. Miraculously, their calls were heard by another group of cavers led by John Walker, who had been exploring a stream chamber not far from where the accident had occurred. Realizing the urgency, Walker and his group rushed over, lights cutting through the dark as they arrived at the edge of the pit. Without hesitation, Walker dove into the pool, his arms sweeping through the water as he frantically searched for John. Visibility was almost to zero, but he went with his gut instinct. Luckily, he was aware enough to not forget his flashlight. Seconds felt like hours as Walker's team, watching tensely, waited to see any sign of John in the water. Finally, Walker surfaced, gasping, with John's limp body in tow. Together, they carefully brought him to the side, laying him down and checking for signs of life. John had passed out. Acting fast, they cleared his airway and attempted to revive him with rescue breaths, hoping to get oxygen into his lungs. When he still showed no signs of life, they began CPR, rhythmically pressing on his chest to restore circulation. John coughed, and water came sputtering out of his mouth as he began to breathe on his own. Though his eyes opened briefly, his words were slurred and incoherent, a sign of the head injury he'd sustained in the fall. They recognized symptoms of a concussion, and though he was breathing, he quickly drifted back into unconsciousness, his condition critical and requiring immediate medical attention. Meanwhile, Funnel and Rogers, shaken and wide-eyed, watched as another member of Walker's group, Richard Hotchkiss, dialed for emergency help. Within minutes, the Knoxville Volunteer Fire Department was alerted, and soon afterward, a specialized cave rescue team, including veteran cavers Tricia Fink and Gary Dougherty, was called to the scene. Arriving at the cave entrance just after 6:30 p.m., they realized the need for a hauling system to extract John from the depths. Fink coordinated additional caving experts from the East Tennessee Grotto, ensuring a team with the skills and equipment to handle the treacherous conditions of Ebenezer Cave. They managed to attach a harness to John's body, careful not to worsen his injuries. After an exhausting effort, John was finally brought to the surface just before midnight. By this time, he was cold and unresponsive, suffering from a head injury that would later be diagnosed as a subdural hematoma, along with numerous abrasions and contusions from the fall. EMTs and rescue volunteers quickly covered him in blankets, providing him with oxygen as they prepared to move him out of the cave and into the waiting ambulance. He was transported to the hospital in critical condition, where he remained in the intensive care unit for days, battling the effects of his injuries. Although he eventually made a full recovery, the experience left a profound impact on all involved. In this last story, just when the person thought his adventure is over, nature strikes. It was early on September the 3rd, 1997, when 3 cavers, full of excitement and a hint of apprehension, entered Owl Cave in Virginia. Their goal was to navigate the winding 3,000-foot cave system and eventually emerge from the back door, a small, tight exit on the opposite side of the ridge. While 2 of the cavers had been through this cave before, for their friend, it was an entirely new adventure. They had assured him it would be straightforward, tricky, but manageable. Little did they know that this would turn into an ordeal none of them would forget. The journey through the cave started smoothly, with each twist and turn only adding to their enthusiasm. The group advanced steadily. For a while, it seemed like the day was going to be nothing but exhilarating. After a few hours, they neared the back exit. As they approached, one of the experienced cavers made an offhand comment. The exit seemed smaller than he remembered. The opening was indeed narrow, much tighter than the 2 veterans had recalled. They maneuvered through cautiously, and with a few twists and shuffles, both exited without much difficulty. They then waited by the exit, expecting their friend to follow close behind. However, as the 3rd caver made his way toward the opening, it became clear that things weren't going as planned. As he pushed forward, wedging his way into the narrow exit, he found himself unable to proceed. His head and shoulders barely poked outside the cave, but his torso was trapped in the passage. Realizing he was stuck, he called out for help, and his friends quickly responded. They initially tried pulling him from the outside, but this only caused him severe pain. Each pull sent sharp aches shooting through his body, making the situation unbearable. Despite his best efforts to push with his legs, he could hardly budge. The cave passage was so sinuous that it made any attempt to leverage his legs impossible. Phil Lucas, the cave's owner, happened to be nearby, camping with other cavers for the Labor Day weekend. Hearing the calls for help, he and a group of cavers rushed to the scene. Initially, everyone thought it would only take a few extra hands to help pull him free. But after several unsuccessful attempts, they realized the problem was far more complex than they'd imagined. The trapped caver was now pinned, unable to move forward or back. For the trapped caver, it was no less than a nightmare. Half of his body was wedged so tightly inside the cave that it felt like it had eaten him half alive and was sucking him in to swallow him whole. One of the rescuers decided to re-enter the cave from the main entrance, hoping to approach the trapped man from behind. The plan was to help guide him back into the cave so they could try another way out. However, the caver had pushed himself too far forward, He was now stuck between several massive desk-sized rocks. Moving any of them would be nearly impossible without tools. Lucas quickly devised a new plan. They would use a battery-powered drill to create a series of holes along the edge of the rock. Working quickly yet carefully, the rescuers drilled and inserted stonemason's wedges and shims into each hole, breaking away pieces of rock. With every small piece they managed to remove, the cavern gained a bit more room to breathe and maneuver. It was an arduous process that took hours, with the rescuers removing the rock in a controlled fashion to avoid causing any harm. Onlookers watched in terror. With each break in the rock, hope began to rise. But some became frustrated, questioning why they were trying to pull him back into the cave rather than out of it. They didn't understand the complexity of the situation, nor did they grasp the necessity of creating room around the trapped man to eventually allow him to move. Finally, after meticulous work, they managed to widen the passage just enough for the caver to slide back into the cave. Now, with more room and fewer protrusions blocking his way, they decided to give the exit another shot. With a few well-placed blows from a sledgehammer, the remaining rock was cleared, and the caver was able to crawl out, free at last. The ordeal had lasted 4 hours. What started as an adventurous day in Owl Cave had become a dramatic test of patience, skill, and sheer willpower. Exhausted and sore, the freed caver was met with applause and relief from the gathered crowd.